facing a high stakes hiring decision. In a lot of cases, you'll be working with a recruiter who may perform a critical role in the decision-making structure. That's important because the quality of a hire and the success and the ultimate long-term effectiveness of a hire depends on so much more than the candidate. It really depends on the soundness of the decision-making structure. So when you're working with a recruiter to perform a critical role in that structure, you need to have some sort of a framework for knowing that the recruiter you're working with is doing a good job. In our industry, unfortunately, it's not uncommon for recruiters to reduce their function to something very transactional, fetching and filtering resumes, maybe applying some generic selection heuristics, maybe coordinating some logistics. This is not harmless. This distorts the signal environment. It degrades judgment at the very point where clarity is needed most. Basically, I think that there are people who need to make high stakes hiring decisions, and the outcome of these decisions depends on more than just the candidate. It depends on how the decision is made. And if a recruiter is playing a role in that decision, how the recruiter performs that function really, really, really matters. If they are compressing the narrative, if they're distorting the signal, diluting the signal, if their interest is not aligned and they're driving toward as many matches as they can make so they can feed their family, then it clouds judgment right when clarity is most needed, right at the foundation of making a decision about who's going to join your team and help you build your future. And that's a big deal. I think that poor hiring and by extension poor recruiting, insofar as they play a role and it plays a role in hiring, it can contribute to tremendous economic and interpersonal damage. So what can we do? I think there's a heuristic for making sure that you're working with a recruiter or someone doing the recruiting function internally in your company. There's a heuristic for making sure that they're doing their job well. So I've got a number of points that I recommend. You should ask, do they treat both parties as legitimate principals? So in a hiring decision, there are two parties whose interests must be reconciled. The companies, they're spending the money, and the candidates, um, they're also paying a cost. They're paying in risk, career trajectory, opportunity cost. A recruiter who only appreciates one side is misreading the structure of the problem altogether. So you can ask, do they treat both parties as legitimate principals? Here's another question. Do they improve the signal to noise ratio? So hiring decisions are probabilistic under conditions of uncertainty. In other words, these are not computable or computably decidable problems. A good recruiter is going to deliver insight. They're going to clarify your messaging. They're going to amplify your exposure. They're going to improve the signal to noise ratio. If you're working with a recruiter who's blasting you with resumes and increasing the noise, they're doing the opposite of what they need to be doing. If they're compressing your narrative, if their filtering is shallow, or they're offering or delivering a false precision, they're corrupting the inputs. They're corrupting the signal. It's very dangerous. So, are they improving signal to noise ratio? It's another
Can
question.
we define what we mean by signal to noise ratio as well? Because it's a great point, but I'd like to put a fine point on what is signal and what is noise.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to take a break from me. So, why don't you elaborate for us on what signal and noise are, and then in a recruiting and hiring context, what are the sorts of things that count as signal?
Yeah. I was once told by a client we've worked with for a long time, over a decade, that the thing that distinguished us from other recruiters they had worked with was perceptiveness. And this was a bit of a profound point to me because I hadn't picked up on this. And frankly, I've never worked with any of these other recruiters, so I didn't know how to compare us. But what he observed was, I think, salient to your point about sometimes in various searches, what is signal and what is noise is different because it's the nature of the role in each position, each hire with each client, different timeframes. They're looking for different things. Um, 10 companies hiring superintendents will hire 10 different superintendents and do it in a different way and do it with a different heuristic. And so there's different, what I'm saying is there's different signal and there's different noise for each client. And it's our job to be perceptive about to the client, what is signal to you? What is most important to you? What is the greatest indicator of success, background, what's critical to this team, to this project, to long-term success? And then optimizing our recruiting methodology and introduction and representation and onboarding technique to complement what is signal within their company. And this is something that we have a unique ability and opportunity for because we get to see inside all sorts of different teams, all sorts of different companies. We get to see inside lots of different companies and have been able to pick up on this pattern of like, oh, it's different everywhere. And a lot of times, because of this pattern recognition that we get to see, our clients don't necessarily have the same. I want to use the word self-awareness. I don't mean that critically, but they just haven't seen the breadth of hiring situations or the breadth of different company cultures or hiring authorities or teams or problems, projects that we have. And so what we do so critically is figure out what is signal for this client and how do we get rid of all of the noise. And then be as intensive and intentional as possible through the hiring process about the signal. So what do I mean by signal? What do I mean by noise? Signal can be um, particularly salient past experience. What is the problem, the specific problem in the company that needs to be solved? And some hiring authorities watching this are going to think, oh, I need a superintendent, right? I have a bandwidth problem. It's like, okay, maybe, but why you have that bandwidth problem could vary dramatically, right? Some people have systemic cultural issues that create turnover that they may or may not be aware of. The project could be troubled. There could be issues in process, means and methods in construction that's causing unnecessary tension. There could be inevitable turnover, circumstantial, just people have life events that mean they have to move or life changes. All of those factor into what is signal and what is noise. And when we go to interview candidates for our clients' positions, there's also a signal to noise calculation that we have to do with that person because we have to understand what are their motives, what are their goals, and how do we find the alignment between our clients' unique goals and motives and context and the candidates. And that's where I'd argue the magic really is in being perceptive about true, pure signal, if you will.
Thank you. I think that's right. As you're talking, it occurs to me that signal is that which is relevant to consider when evaluating a candidate's fit. There's this scene in this movie we talk about sometimes around here, Moneyball. There's all these baseball executives sitting around the table, and they're talking about this baseball player who's he's got the looks and he's got whatever else. He's got the girlfriend, something like that. I think he's going to be a great player for us. And this is a decision making person in decision making role who is mistaken about what counts as signal versus noise. Whether a baseball player has the looks is irrelevant how they play. And this is in contrast to the way Brad Pitt's character makes decisions about how to operate the team. And he's very specific and forceful about what he thinks counts as signal. Things like, does he get on base? Um, I uh, recently was talking to an individual, an applicant, um, who seemed to be a little bit worried about kind of the telephone problem between clients and candidates. Telephone, of course, is this parlor game where you whisper into one person's ear and they pass the message on, and then the person at the end of the chain says aloud what they think that they heard, and it's radically distorted from what the sender of the message had originally uttered. And it's fun and it's silly. In the case of recruiting, we often find ourselves um, cascading communication in between a client and a candidate. And what I told him was that I've been surprised to find that um, messages tend to get clarified and amplified through the recruiting process at Ambassador Group, in my experience. What I mean by that is we'll have clients tell us, oh, I understand my own need better now after having talked to you, because you've provided me with these structured reflection prompts, or you've asked these probing, insightful questions that got me to think clearer about my own needs and my own pain. And we take it that we are dedicated students of the question about how to solve hiring, how to hire well, how to find fit, what counts as signal. And so that puts us in a really fun position and a really strong position when it comes to helping a client clarify their own need and put a framework to it, put vocabulary to it. And then we find ourselves in this privileged position of getting to not just amplify the exposure of that message, but to translate it, to apply it, to incarnate it within the context of candidates, so that they can understand what it is that they are looking at. So, thinking and talking about this, I happened upon some ways of thinking and talking about this in this other conversation that um, uh, were helpful. I don't see ambassador group's role, or the recruiting role, um, as, if it's done well, as at risk of dilution of message or corruption of signal, but rather if a recruiter, either internal or external, is performing their job effectively, they're helping to clarify the message and then to translate it, in addition to extending the reach of its exposure.
That oftentimes that conversation with, say, the candidate or the client can be, up to, or sometimes even more than an hour or hours of conversation, and it ends up getting refined and distilled down into what is the core, the root of the issue, of the motivation, um, and in a sense, you could consider us maybe professional telephone players, right? So when you have a group of people playing it, once in a while, maybe you see a lot of distortion, but we are particularly good about thinking about how to align the signal between the parties. And I would say this is incredibly important when you're talking about middle to senior level management hires, in construction or any industry. Um, you need people looking out for those factors, because that's what's going to predict a certain degree of durability or long-term fit in the role. I kind of derailed you on the signal to noise ratio, but you had some really good points. Can you continue those?
Yeah, no, I love it. Another question that a hiring authority can ask to help determine whether a recruiter or someone performing the role of a recruiter for them is effective is, do they understand where human judgment is non-substitutable? We are at a moment with AI um, in the Western world, in the world. There's a lot that can be automated, and that's great. A lot of outreach can be automated. A lot of content creation, certain aspects of it can be automated, um, and that's good because it it's a force multiplier on humanity. It positions us so that we can, rather than it's like the printing press, rather than copying manuscripts by hand, as many benefits as that can confer on a scribe, is tedious and unnecessary when it comes to mass market paperbacks. Now, everyone can get a copy of Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, whatever, on the cheap, and that's great. Um, you know, the cotton gin, etc. These things um, put us in a position as human beings to have leisure, to have time for reflection and art and creativity and entertainment and things that make us human. Um, what cannot be automated, certainly not at this time and probably anytime soon, maybe not ever. It's a philosophical question. See me after class. Um, is a certain kind of judgment when it comes to fit, context, and counterfactuals. Um, and there's a tension here that I sometimes struggle to articulate. Maybe TJ has some vocabulary around it, um, between on the one hand, being all chest, being all vibe, being all intuition, all gut, um, and then on the other hand, being too automated, too AI-y. Somewhere in the middle, we have a way to clarify, to quantify, to make definite, to categorize, and to gain insight into the goodness of a fit between a client company in a particular role and an individual candidate, um, while also making sure that we understand what is non-substitutable, where the human judgment needs to be applied within that structure, within that context. TJ, do you have some language or a way of thinking about this, that articulates the insight that I'm trying to deliver here?
particularly on what is fit.
Well, on
Judgment
how
level.
fit can be determined and the role that intuition and human judgment properly plays.
Yeah. So I break fit down into a couple of categories when it comes to recruiting, and particularly our recruiting for a client. One form of fit is, hey, we have a certain job. It's shaped like this. We need a person with a certain level of experience and contribution capability to interview, and that is a relatively straightforward, even maybe linear form of fit. It's a basic form of fit, and that gets a candidate to the introduction, to the interview. And what Ambassador says is, hey, this person's worth spending time with. We don't tell the client, hey, they fit the job, because this is just the intro level of fit. The second level of fit is, fit to the hiring authority, fit to the manager, fit to the team, fit to the problem, fit to the culture. And where our perceptiveness comes into this process is watching the evolution of the relationship between the parties and applying our pattern recognition experience, which is gained over thousands of reps, and looking for indicators that there is fit, either in a positive or a negative sense. And sometimes this is just a matter of something needs to be communicated more clearly. Sometimes it's irreconcilable. And our job is to surface these topics, often through our personal observations, maybe through analysis of the interview process itself or feedback, and reflect that back to the client, not so that we can once again make some sort of unilateral decision or recommendation to hire the person based on fit, because fit is not it's not a unilateral thing. It's not a binary thing. Fit is a percentage, and I don't know if you ever have 100% fit, because relationships are inherently two or bilateral, two directional, and they have to be maintained. They have to be developed. So you can hire someone who's a good fit and then fail to cultivate that fit, fail to maintain the relationship, onboard poorly, check in poorly, build the relationship in poor ways, maybe have poor leadership technique, and you can erode the fit that was actually properly established, properly validated through the hiring process. And so sometimes we see a hiring authority wrestle with, hey, what did we miss here in this hiring process or interviewing process if a hire didn't work out? And that's fair to do, and also assess, well, how did we maintain that fit? How did we develop it? And what I often see is very busy hiring authorities who have an attention particularly to the type of work the business does. You know, in our case, our specialty, we have a specialty in construction. If they're more focused on the construction itself and less on the team, you see more incidences of onboarding probably not being attended to as much as would be helpful, and the leadership failing to see, or the candidate failing to see, maybe areas where misalignment is growing and you've got some sort of problem coming up in the future. This is why we do onboarding check-ins, is to support a continued cultivation of the fit between the parties. um, and this is once again the pursuit of signal, right, not noise, of what is important to the candidate, what's important to the hiring authority and the team and the project, and how do we provide an environment and a process that facilitates the most high quality opportunity for both parties to contribute to their own fit. We can't build that fit for them. We can establish, maintain, or recognize an initial level of fit that gets them to the conversation. We can support their development of that fit, and encourage it, but we can't do it for them.
Yeah, this is helpful. So the remaining points that I had on my list include the following. Does the recruiter probe the underlying structure? Um, when you have a job description, it's describing a an imaginary person who doesn't exist. Um, and what a good recruiter is able to do is ask these clarifying questions that, in order to understand what it is that this candidate will need to be able to solve. What is the pain that needs relief, or what is the ambition that needs to be empowered? What is the dream that needs to be realized? And then to work backwards, to reason in light of those ends according to the means that will uh, make a candidate excellent at achieving those ends. And so a good recruiter, or someone performing a recruiting function internally, needs to really probe the underlying structure and to ask the questions behind the questions, to understand the goals and the needs within the client company, so they can understand how a candidate might help satisfy them. So there's a curiosity there. The next one is, and I'm going to have two more. Number 5, do they expose their reasoning? Trust really is cultivated through transparency, through a visibility. And when you're in a working relationship with someone in a high stakes scenario, you want to have access to uh, their reasoning, their rationale, um, and not just the output. So here's an example in recruiting. A recruiter could make an introduction of a candidate and say, "We think you should interview this candidate. We think they're great. We think they'll be a good fit. They do excellent work to a high finish quality. Um, Please hire them." Um, or they could expose their reasoning and say, "Here's what we did to evaluate, to qualify, to filter this candidate, and here's the basis for the conclusions that we drew." So they expose their reasoning, um, even beyond candidate introductions, when it comes to a strategic approach to the market. A recruiter might leave this opaque. They might conceal their own methods and approach. Or they might say, here's what we're thinking. We're going to be approaching the market like this and using this kind of messaging and this kind of talk. And I know you said 3 to 5 years of experience, but we're going to cast the net a little broader for these reasons, and then we'll evaluate in these manners, exposing the rationale so that good candidates aren't prematurely filtered, and candidates likely to be a poor fit aren't inflated and hyped up. Um, no one knows your business better than you do, and a good recruiter will help gain insight into that and even help you understand your own business even better. But they're still not going to understand it the way that you do. And if they're not exposing or willing to expose their reasoning for their strategy, for their approach, for the conclusions that they've drawn, or for introducing and recommending a particular candidate, then you're taking on a significant amount of risk as a client, as a company, in trusting that this recruiter is going to be effective in performing those roles.
One of my favorite things to do is introduce a candidate who, on paper, doesn't fit the job, but because we understood what the signal was between the candidate and the client, nonetheless introducing them, and the client uh, very glad that they interviewed the candidate. That in any other context, if they would have been screening the resume themselves, they probably wouldn't have interviewed the candidate. I think this is maybe some of the work that makes me proudest is we say, hey, look, we have this candidate. Here's all the reasons why you might not want to interview them, but here's why we think you should, and then to have that proven out to be right. And that's happened quite a few times just from paying attention to what are the underlying factors to success here. And like you said, when we take a position discovery, like you said, it's an imaginary person that fits this problem. Understanding the problem is more important than the imaginary person. The imaginary person is one variation of a human being that could solve the problem, but in reality there are many permutations. And the broader the leadership capacity is of the client, the more tolerance we're going to have for varying permutations of skill and ability and a contribution, for a candidate to come in and be successful for the client. Good stuff. Thanks,
Yeah,
Lloyd.
well said. It's always fun, exhilarating, a little nerve wracking to start an email with "Hear me out." Although I think because uh, although this candidate, you know, might on the surface seem not to be a good fit for these reasons that I fully know and acknowledge and own, I think they're worth interviewing because a good recruiter is going to take some risk. They're going to bare their neck a little bit. They're going to go out on some limbs, because part of what you're paying for is judgment and insight on their part. Um, my last point, the last item in this heuristic, um, uh, is expressed by this question: do they hold a coherent theory of success, or an effective or a meaningful theory of success? Here's what I mean. Um, an offer letter is not the finish line. Getting a candidate hired, making a match, merely that is not success, or it's not uh, a well-rounded or robust or mature understanding of success. The way we've defined it at Ambassador Group is by promoting durable matches. That's kind of how we categorize success. Um, and so, if a recruiter achieves a match, an offer is made, a contract is signed, um, and and the hire doesn't work out, um, for one reason or another. It's painful, it's costly, it's damaging, and we're not perfect. We see that sometimes here too, and sometimes that stings. and we go into diagnostic mode and look at what we can do and what role we can play um, to help leaders build aligned teams going forward or rebuild aligned teams. Um, but part of how we promote durable matches includes a lot of consultation and support for the candidate and the client around this transition, leading up to, during, and after, for up to a year after hire. And so you may or may not agree with the way that we do it. See me after class. Um, but the underlying point here is that if you are working with someone toward a common goal, you want to make sure that you share success conditions with them, that you're aligned on what would count as achieving this goal. That's the underlying point. Those are my six. You want to work with someone that treats both parties as legitimate principals, um, the company and the individual. Someone that improves the signal to noise ratio. They're actually adding value to the communication chain here. They understand where human judgment is not substitutable for AI or machines or your ATS resume screener or whatever it is. They insist on probing the underlying structure of the problem and understanding the need. They expose the reasoning for their judgments and actions to you. There's a transparency there. And they hold a coherent theory of success, or they are aligned with you in your vision of what it would mean to be successful in this endeavor.
Good
Hope this
stuff.
helps.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Subscribe for more.
Smash that like button.